Hello and welcome. I'm Maria Ressa. We're doing Rappler Talk with a man who is very familiar with a lot of the things we're dealing with today. Raffy Alunan was former Interior and Local Government Secretary under Fidel Ramos. He also ran the Anti-Terror Council at one point and was very much aware of how crisis security teams work. Raffy, it's really good to have you with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, tell me, what was your reaction to Resorts World attack last night?
Well, last night the first thing that crossed my mind was that it was under attack by terrorists. The reason for that is because I was getting feedback from people who knew persons that were inside Resorts World, and the initial feedback that I got was that there was gunfire,
Yes.
and that there were people that were screaming supposedly Allahu Akbar.
Yeah.
And the person who was feeding me this information is a very credible person, and the persons that were inside Resort World were persons that were considered credible as well. My first cousin was also there, and he sent me a message. He says, I was able to escape
Yeah.
in the nick of time,
Yeah.
but I heard gunfire, and I heard from the people that were screaming that this was an ISIS attack. I would, of course, say that probably that's the initial reaction of people, because after all, Marawi is still fresh in our minds.
Correct.
And ISIS attacks all over the world have been, properly publicized.
Yes.
So it's just natural for them to think that way. I was shocked this morning to hear that it wasn't a terrorist attack, but the handiwork of a deranged man who probably had lost a lot of money in the casino and wanted to steal money.
Right.
But then when I heard that, I felt that somehow it didn't compute.
Yes.
Because if I were a thief, I'd go in there stealthily. I want to make sure that I don't get detected.
Right.
And I'd like to leave the place. I'll have an exit plan.
Right.
I'd like to leave the place undetected as well.
Correct. Yes.
But this fellow was dressed to kill. He was making a mess of himself, shooting at the ceiling, shooting
Right.
at the floor, burning the place down. Those are not the footprints of a thief.
Yes.
Those are the footprints of either a nutcase,
Right.
or somebody who was tasked to do that.
To me, a telling point was that he killed himself by dousing himself with gasoline, right? And even no one has really talked about the venue that was attacked, gambling, casino. I mean, you've dealt with these extremist ideology, the virulent ideology.
Well, yes, the hallmark of a terrorist attack is one that where the venue is a place that's frequented by there's high human traffic,
Right.
and it's frequented by foreigners. So casinos are not a surprise.
Yes.
Malls,
Right.
schools, airports, etc., and the like, restaurants.
Right.
But what I still don't have enough information on is, where did the 36 people die? Did they die in rooms? Did they die in an open space?
Right.
And if it's a large open space, why couldn't they have escaped? That's number one. If there's only one gunman, why did they die of suffocation?
Right.
And if there's only one gunman, what happened to the security forces inside the hotel? Why didn't they overwhelm him? Number one. And number two, where were the safety teams that are supposed to guide the guests out of the hotel? There's normally a regular drill.
Correct.
You know?
Correct.
So there are a lot of it's a lot of information that's still missing, and so it's very difficult at this point to really jump to conclusions.
Yes. We've seen, and this is again normal during a breaking news kind of story,
Yeah.
where officials say one thing, say a different thing. I mean, what's been your reaction to the different? First, it's a robbery. Then it's not a robbery. He shot himself. He was shot by forces. He killed himself. How do we look at all of this?
Well, first of all, I think it has to do with the way crisis management is being handled. normally in situation like this, there's an official spokesman that
Correct.
speaks to the reporters. There's a formal press conference, and details as the facts are unearthed are reported.
Correct.
And usually you avoid speculating as to what happened. Normally, detectives would not rule out anything.
Yes.
They put everything on the table
Yes.
and then let the facts, eliminate
Correct.
one theory from another, etc. But that takes time. You can't have instant answers,
Yes.
right? So people have to be patient.
Right.
In the meantime, I think that notwithstanding the absence of enough information as to determine whether it was a terrorist attack or not, I think it's still prudent for people to be vigilant and assume that there are terror threats out there,
Right.
lurking in the shadows, ready to pounce. Today is Friday, for example,
Correct.
and everybody wants to go out on a Friday and the weekend. I understand it was payday,
Yes.
so people have money to spend, and it's a good time as any. If I was a terrorist, to take advantage of that, given the fact that the forces are spread out,
Yeah.
they're probably fatigued. I'd probably think that way. I'll assume that,
Right.
and I may carry out simultaneous attacks.
And you had to deal with these, right? I mean, you had
I've
to
had
deal
to deal with
some-
that during my time. For example, during the time of President Ramos, we had to deal with Al Qaeda. There was an Al Qaeda cell that was here to kill President Clinton, President Ramos, Pope John Paul II,
Right.
and then
This is
carry
the
out-
beginning of everything. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
Yes.
I mean, this was
This was the team of Sheikh Mohammed,
Ramsey.
actually,
Yes. Yes.
because his nephew was Ramzi Youssef,
Right.
right? And they came from Balochistan,
Right.
That part of
Right.
Pakistan. And the big plan that they had, called Bojinka, was designed to plant bombs in 11 airliners flying out of Asian airports, going to the United States, and then blowing them up in midair.
Right.
They had the dry run, and that dry run was a Philippine Airlines flight to Japan
Yes.
in December 1994.
1994.
Yes.
Correct. I remember this.
And the only thing that saved that plane from blowing up in midair was the fact that the bomb that was used by Ramzi Youssef was undercharged. But I remember asking my investigators who were in Japan, why was it placed under that seat? Was it placed randomly, or was there a specific reason? And when they looked at the drawings of the aircraft, they saw that the fuel line was passed underneath
Wow.
that seat. And the only thing that prevented the fuel line from blowing up was the fact that the steel plate was just dented. It did not penetrate. The charge didn't penetrate. But unfortunately, the passenger seated seated there died, and those in the immediate vicinity were wounded. So that was a dry run. When Bojinka was foiled, we actually were able to take into custody 2 members of the four-man team.
I remember Abdul Hakim Murad, who
Yes.
was probably the very first pilot that was.
Yes, he was in my. Both of them were in my custody, and the other one was Wali Khan.
Yes,
Wali
Wali Khan Amin Shah.
Amin Shah, yes.
Yeah.
But he managed to escape
Yes.
on the day that Pope John Paul was saying mass in Luneta. So you can imagine. Imagine my hair; it's white now, right?
Yeah.
Before I received that news, it was black.
But what you may not know is this was kind of the blueprint for everything.
Yes.
Everything that was unearthed in the Philippines wound up being used later on because the shoe bomber, for example,
No,
right?
and 911, 9/11 was a variation of Bojinka.
Correct. When you say September 11th, the September 11
September
attacks,
11,
right?
that's
So
correct.
it was really
Instead of blowing them up mid-air, they crashed
they
it.
crashed
Right?
them into buildings. And I remember the very first time I saw that was actually in Philippine intelligence reports that
Yes.
said that they were going to take planes and crash them into buildings. That triggered my whole obsession with,
Well, Abdul Hakim Murad was trained to crash his plane, the 12th plane,
yeah.
on the headquarters of the CIA in Langley.
Oh my gosh, yeah, yeah, correct. So let's fast forward. So the Al Qaeda linked groups, Jama Islamiyah was effectively Al Qaeda's arm in Southeast Asia,
Correct.
right? So after here, and then we've seen authorities around the world really gouge out the top and middle rank leadership of this Al Qaeda network. Now that's been replaced by a much more virulent, the ISIS network. And
Well, let me just backtrack. I was sent by President Ramos to Pakistan because we had information to the effect that Al Qaeda and Hashim Salamat were in
We're
direct
talking,
contact.
right.
Salamat would send trainees. Osama bin Laden would send trainers.
right,
And his brother-in-law, who was here, Jamal Khalifa, would fund the whole thing. So I brought those intelligence holdings with me and presented it to Prime Minister Bhutto, including a letter from President Ramos requesting for closer intelligence exchange. And they confirmed it. And they showed me the places where the recruits were brought for religious training, military training, and
I
on-the-job
also
training.
followed this. Yes, correct.
And then they said, Osama bin Laden was part of that group that got trained by the CIA and ISI,
Correct.
Pakistan's ISI,
Yes.
to fight the Russians.
Yes.
And unfortunately, the Americans failed to recover the firearms when the war was won. So the fighters, the Mujahideens,
Yes.
when they returned to their countries, brought back those weapons. Right? And since we have porous borders here, that gave them a free pass to come in with their weapons, and that was the time when the Abu Sayyaf was born.
Being formed.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Now, fast forward, it's not the Taliban or Al Qaeda; it's the ISIS. Okay? The question is, ISIS sprung overnight, and they were very, very rich. They had a lot of weapons backing them up. The question is, who backed them up? Who created them? Who backed them up? And why are they able to leave Syria
Syria
and
and
Iraq?
Iraq.
Since after all, that's where they want to establish their caliphate. And why are they going to other parts of the world? Right? So there are a lot of questions that need answers,
Yes.
and we want to find out who's funding them,
Right.
how are they able to smuggle in their firearms, right? When they get to their destinations like Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, who harbors them?
Right. You see this, again, in our reporting at least, we're seeing that a lot of the old network remains in place,
Yes.
right? So the Maute group, for example, their father was part of the MILF that sheltered members of the Jama Islamiyah.
Yes.
Are you seeing that? There's a generational kind of,
Yes, it's they're all connected. They're linked.
Yeah.
Except that the Maute has developed a reputation of being a drug syndicate. It's a clan that made a lot of money selling drugs, and that many members are connected to either the BIFF or the MILF, and all that. And I'm getting information to the effect that in the case of Marawi, we have a convergence of drug gangs,
yes,
extremist groups from the islands,
Yes.
Basulta,
yes,
led by Isnilon Hapilon,
Masilan, Sulu,
and elements of the MILF and BIFF who've got an axe to grind against the government. No? So they're all there.
coming together in central Mindanao.
Again,
right?
the word Pintakasi comes up.
Yeah. Let me bring you back to the resorts world, right? And how you would deal with something like this. Overnight, a Filipino member of ISIS, the Maute group, claims that the resorts world was an attack by them.
Yeah. we don't know if it's pure propaganda, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
How would you handle something like that?
I'd quietly. I won't make a big thing out of it.
Yeah.
I'll take note of it,
Yeah.
but I'll have my intelligence people check it out, whether it's true or not. Because, you know, groups like that will always try to project themselves
Correct.
and take advantage of the fact that not everybody can determine whether what they're saying is true or false. Yeah.
How vulnerable is Metro Manila to a terrorist attack?
How vulnerable? I can't answer that purely because I don't know how good a setup we have.
Okay. In terms of now, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because that's the authorities will never blurt that out, right? I do know that we do have a good intelligence community, but having said that, we have a intelligence community that cannot see everything all at once at the same time.
Correct.
And this is where government and society have to work very closely together. In situations like this, the point is always lost that if we want our government forces to effectively detect and deter
Yes.
terrorists, society has to be proactive.
Has to be with the people. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
and they have to give timely and accurate information. And our intelligence forces who capture the data must be able to process it very, very quickly and then fan it out to the action units. No? So it cannot be overemphasized. In a time like this, when you have ISIS on the march worldwide,
Yeah.
and in Marawi,
Yes.
and in Sulu, and Basilan, and Zamboanga,
Right.
You have to assume.
Even in the region, right? The day after, there were twin suicide bombings in Jakarta,
That's
in a
correct.
bus
In
terminal,
Jakarta,
right? Yeah.
in Egypt,
Egypt,
yes,
yeah.
in Manchester.
Yes.
So you have to assume that Manila is a target.
Okay.
You have to assume that Cebu, Davao, Jensan, Cotabato City, even Baguio, and other parts of the country are targets. A terrorist will always look for vulnerabilities,
Right.
where the risk to him is least and the risk to the target is highest. So he'll look for the alertness of the security forces, the deployment of security forces. Are they hardened? Is the city hardened enough?
Right.
Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Harden the targets. That's the first step,
Correct.
right?
Because I remember in '95, before EPIL was struck, we were able to get the complete plans of the Abu Sayyaf to hit Jensan. And I remember sitting down with Mayor Antonino and the Southcom chief at the time, General Reggie Lacson, to divulge the plan.
Yes, yes.
We knew the ingress-egress points. We knew the places to be attacked, the banks,
Wow.
drugstores,
Yeah.
pawn shops. They were going to get money and logistics, food supplies, medical supplies, aside from money
Right.
and jewelry. And then we also knew their egress points. So the order was to harden. I think they spotted it,
Yes.
so they switched to Plan B.
Which is
And Plan B was EPIL.
EPIL.
And we weren't fast enough to get the information, fast enough to bring it upstairs and push it down to our units. No. Then they did. How were they able to penetrate successfully? They came in disguised as our soldiers.
Yes.
I think they did the same thing in Marawi.
Yes. Well, certainly some of the photos we've seen that have come out from ISIS propaganda has them they're wearing vests and helmets
Yes.
and high-powered firearms.
So enough to fool, a
Normal people.
regular soldier who's not really trained to
How interesting.
see these things.
Let me bring you back again to last night when you said, it's if you were going to rob, you would not be dressed that way. I mean, so how do you determine whether it's a terrorist attack?
I'd walk in there like a cat, quietly. I'd
Yeah.
blend
Yeah.
with it,
Yeah.
and then steal when nobody's looking,
And then leave.
and then leave undetected. No.
Right. Right. In terms of what's next, what should we expect to happen next?
Well, I expect these guys to strike. As to when and where, or really all depends on their assessment of the risk environment
Got it.
to them.
Yes, exactly. And they've been mobilizing now for the last year and a half. At least that's the reports that we're getting. You were an official who had to deal with keeping information for national security and releasing information for the protection of the public. How do you find that line?
Well, it's still a struggle because the tension always is between two schools of thought: need to know and need to share.
Right.
There comes a point where what you try to keep from the public, you have to share, but only up to a point. To keep them alert, to get them to be vigilant, but without telegraphing your punches.
Yeah. Yeah. Understood.
So,
That's a tough balance.
and that's where your crisis teams come in. They have to know exactly what to say,
Right.
when to say it, and what to do overtly versus covertly.
Resorts World happening in the context of the Marawi. It's the 10th day of battle. We're in the evening of the 10th day of battle to try to retake Marawi.
Yeah.
Connections, do you know, again, this seemed to be, again, looking at it, not as the Philippines, it seems like a trial, right? I mean, one guy looking at potential soft targets.
I don't know if that guy was working on his own or was tasked to do something with people pulling the strings, testing the waters, testing reactions. There's that.
Yeah.
That can't be ruled out.
Yeah.
Right? It could just well be that he was a nutcase that got away with it
Could kill
until he got
himself.
shot and he
Yeah.
had to kill himself.
Even in that case, there's self-preservation, right? I guess that's why I keep going back to ideology. That
Yeah.
why would you kill yourself?
Well, we don't know this guy. We
Yeah.
don't know his name.
Yeah.
We don't know his background. So very hard to speculate at this point.
Understood. Understood. Let's go back. Your reaction to what's happening in Marawi and the next steps for this.
Well, number one, we should be fielding only units that have been trained for urban warfare.
This is the difficulty. Yeah.
Now, we don't, the question is, do we have enough urban warfare trained units to deal with the situation in Marawi?
Yeah.
And the other question is, if there are simultaneous
Situations.
urban warfare situations, will we have enough people,
Yeah.
resources to do that?
And that training is very different from what soldiers would normally get, right? This kind of house-to-house urban guerrilla.
It eats up a lot of time, human resources, as well as armor and air assets. It's the most difficult thing to fight. Combat in an urban setting. You have to go house to house, floor to floor, room to room, right? And you don't know what's behind it.
The government has said there are foreigners here in the Philippines.
Yes.
Some of them have, 8 of them have died in
Yes.
the first few days.
I thought I spotted an article that said there was an estimated 40
That was
foreigners.
coming from the Indonesians. The Indonesians said that they believed there were 40 coming in here, right? Yeah. Again, that's not new for someone like you, right?
Yeah.
This has been before.
Yeah.
How do you deal with this?
Whether they're foreigners or domestic, I lump them all up as you're the enemy, you're a criminal, and I'm going to bring you to justice one way or the other.
Yeah, yeah.
Never mind the labels.
President Duterte declared martial law in Mindanao. Is that the right steps? Would you have asked for that if you were DILG secretary?
He has. You'll always have to grant the president you have to allow that the president has complete information,
Yeah.
or much better information than the ordinary Filipino. I will assume that the information that he had led him to the conclusion that the best defensive maneuver that he could use to protect the people was to declare martial law. not because there was a rebellion taking place in Marawi,
Right.
but he was anticipating this thing from spreading, you know. So it's a defensive move,
Right.
and he knows he's got 60 days, and he also knows that if this spreads, then Congress will most likely, extend martial law.
This isn't the first time, and we've talked about the threat. I guess as we close,
But-
right?
but-
Go.
But President Ramos also said something that I think should be taken into account. Instead of martial law throughout Mindanao, perhaps in specific spots, and then work from there. Work from there, because the blanket application of martial law throughout Mindanao sort of sent shivers.
Right.
So people got scared. There were, in some provinces, they said, "Hey, we don't need martial law here. We're okay."
Right.
So we should listen to them.
Right.
On the other hand, we should also grant the president the leeway that if he thinks that the information based on what he has is that terrorism is bound to spread, so he'd rather implement martial law now and put up all of the preventive measures, to be able to protect communities and the people. So
Well,
I'll grant him that.
I've been writing about this threat. I believe there is a threat that's there. So we've been talking about this for a little bit also.
Yeah.
How would you describe ISIS now, this threat for the Philippines and for the region?
I think it's a real threat, and whether they go by the name of Al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, whether they're Sunni or Shia,
Yeah.
the extremist strain is out to establish a global caliphate, and we are part of that. We're a target, and they'd like us to be under that caliphate. And the Philippines is all the more attractive to them because we're 80%, 75% Christian,
Correct.
right? So it's a big challenge for them. So they're all proselytizing actually, hoping to convert us. As it is, they're very encouraged because a large part of the Muslim population today are Balik Islam, converts. I am told that there are 11 million Muslims today, but those living in ARMM are between 4 to 5 million, so the rest are scattered. No? The question is, how many Muslims, whether they are converted or not, are of the extremist strain?
Right.
1%. If it's 1%, that's 100,000 people.
Right.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
And we've been hearing about recruitment in the universities. MSU has been mentioned. There was a Saudi sheikh last March. There was an assassination attempt against. And we've had these signals. Why is it a surprise?
Maybe it's because some people haven't been paying attention. Maybe they've been focused too much on one thing and forgetting, the rest that make up life in the Philippines. Maybe they're too hung up on politics and forgetting the rest of nation-building requirements.
Right.
So there's that. And I seriously believe that the country has a serious attention deficit problem.
Even more now in the age of social media. No,
That's correct.
the last thing is, during the time of Al-Qaeda and in the time of ISIS, the Philippines has always been a kind of training ground. And it seems like it's doing this again with a theater of operations in our neighboring country. So the threat moves to other parts of Southeast Asia. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a fair assessment because we're basically known to be very lax. Okay? Sure, we say, we're a free country or a democratic country. But there are other free and democratic countries who are very serious about their external and internal defense responsibilities. We've been very irresponsible. We've been remiss in our duties. You can see that in the way we've largely neglected external defense.
Yes.
So if we don't have our external defenses in place, how can we secure ourselves internally, right? We can easily be entered.
Porous borders.
Porous borders,
Yeah.
etc. So it's a huge problem. The second, is the fact that the quality of our governance really has to improve. We have to ask ourselves, how can these guys enter these communities, these cities and towns? What are the mayors and the governors doing?
Right.
What are the barangay captains
Right.
doing?
Right.
And when these people leave for another place, how come there's no report?
Correct.
So there's a failure of governance,
Yeah.
especially at the local level, and a failure of intelligence, because they're supposed to report that right away.
Right. Right. A common friend of ours, Rohan Gunaratna, who
Yes.
runs ICPVTR in Singapore, was saying that he didn't think it was a failure of intelligence as much as it was a failure of the appreciation of intelligence.
Well, that's also true. Some people may have the information, but they may not think that it's important.
Yeah.
So they fail to report it. It's a yes. I think he chose his words very well. Failure of appreciation.
Yeah. Because we've certainly been talking about it, right? I mean, that's not. So, as we close, I know I have to.
When he says failure of appreciation, I'd like to add
Sure.
that there are a lot of people who take things for granted. It's all there, but they
Yeah.
have this nonchalant attitude. They're apathetic. They really don't care.
Yeah.
So it's not really it's not a failure of appreciation, but a failure of citizenship, if you ask me.
Your last thoughts, your advice to Filipinos, advice to government, and you've been here before.
Well, crisis management is critical. We have to have the right mindsets and the right skills in place. We have to build up our security forces, especially our intelligence and counterintelligence. We don't know how badly infiltrated we are. For all you know, our plans are being reported to the enemy.
Yes.
That's why every now and then we get caught with our pants down. But society has to be vigilant. They have to be proactive. Securing ourselves requires a whole of nation approach. You just can't leave this to the government because they'll be overwhelmed.
Yes. Yes.
So we have to help them by being proactive, being vigilant and alert, and whatever information we see out there should be given to them in a timely manner. Now that said, government has to make sure that the public knows who to call.
Yes.
Because oftentimes the public says we keep on calling these numbers but nobody answers.
Correct.
Right? And whatever happened to 911, the national,
Yes.
whatever happened to, what was that number, 888?
88. Yeah. 888.
888?
Yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera. no?
Yes.
Whatever happened to the emergency broadcast system?
Right.
At the when you have a crisis,
This
there
is the
should only
time.
there should only be one radio station or TV station that would be, communicating to the public.
Correct. Correct.
So all of these things have to be taken into account. But no, for the young people, they have to pay attention. They have to know what the risks, what the risk environment is like. They cannot think that they're invulnerable, or rather invincible, and that it can only happen to other places, no,
Yes.
and not to them. The threat is real. The risk is very real. Terrorists they don't discriminate. They're not. They don't discriminate. They'll kill soft targets, whether they're babies or women or the infirm. They don't care. They're out to kill and terrorize. So they have to be very, very careful and be prudent and circumspect.
Fantastic. Thank you. Your thoughts are it's so great to talk to you again, Raffy.
Thank you, Maria.
You can ask him questions. He's on Facebook, Raffy
Yes,
Alunan
that's right.
the third. Also on Twitter? Not so much. On
Yes,
Facebook.
not so much,
yeah?
but I'm on Twitter. Although I don't go there,
So you catch him on Facebook.
my name there is Tio or Tito Paeng.
I'll find it. I'll tweet it for you. We've been speaking with Raffy Alunan. He's a former Secretary of Interior and Local Government in the Philippines. He has handled situations like this. In fact, reminding me again that Bojinka plot, the Philippines was the blueprint for 9/11.
That's right.
And we are again in a moment in time, right, where the authorities and the public must work together to deal with this
And
threat.
the mindset of the people you were dealing with is no different from the mindset of the terrorists today. They
Correct.
still want to establish a global caliphate.
Caliphate, the same thing, and much more vicious. I would
That's
argue, right? They
More
want
virulent.
more virulent. I'm Maria Ressa. Thank you for joining us. Be safe out there.